I think medicine has changed from treating illnesses to helping people heal. My parents are both doctors, always instilled hard work. So we had people around us who worked hard and probably achieved more than we did. As a teenager, I loved being around children. I knew entering medical school that when I came out, I was going to be working with kids in pediatrics. In neurodevelopmental disorder, genes play a part. We also know that stress is also very important. So you're thinking, how does stress affect the baby? Starts from actually pre-conception, and then in pregnancy, if you constantly expose babies in utero to stress hormones like cortisol, we see that those babies later grow up to have anxiety issues, problems with their executive functioning. And this is shown even in Asian society. So there's a good study called the Gusto study in Singapore that followed up women. What it showed is the mothers did not have to be diagnosed with anxiety disorder or depressive disorder. If they had anxiety symptoms, their babies had these issues later on.
How do you think seeing these patients and dealing with these parents has changed the way you view life?
It helped me with my parenting.
How so?
Open communication with my children. Personally, I'm the sort of person who feels that I've never achieved 100%.
When do you call it? When do you know enough's enough?
That's a hard one. I never know when it's enough.
Okay.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Leaders Unlocked. Today we're joined by Dr. Rajini Sarvananthan. So Dr. Rajini is one of the three people who pioneered and spearheaded the Developmental Paediatrics unit in the country, and I think it got established back in 2008.
2000 and actually going back, we started the Child Development Center in HUKM back in 2005.
Okay.
And we had it officially launched in 2007.
You established something before it was, before things like autism, ADHD. These things were, if not stigmatized, they were probably not, many people probably weren't even aware of them.
Yeah,
right?
I think awareness was still low at that point.
Yeah. It's an amazing feat. 2 decades on, you're still very active within the field. In my perspective, you're clearly an anomaly in terms of what you've achieved, right? Pioneering something of such capacity in a country like Malaysia, I'm sure it required a lot of grit and perseverance, but I'm always very intrigued by people who've achieved the level of success such as you. I really tie a lot of our achievements at a later point in our life to how we were raised when we were younger.
Yeah.
So take me back, Dr. Rajini. What was your life like growing up, and how did you then get into medicine, pediatrics, developmental pediatrics?
I'm the second of three children. My parents are both doctors, and they always instilled hard work. My dad was married to his work, we always said. And my mom sacrificed her original career to raise us. She continued to be a doctor, don't get me wrong. She worked in the area of public health and health planning, etc. So I guess we had role models, and not just that, we lived next door to an aunt who was a dentist in public service, raising her own 3 girls by herself. So we had people around us who worked hard and probably achieved more than we did. Coming from a Sloanist family, you either became a lawyer, doctor, engineer, dentist, teacher, that sort of career, right? Growing up as a teenager, I loved being around children. Because I was part of the Girl Guides, then the Interact Club, we did a lot of community service. And I actually wanted to become a social worker, to which my mom actually said, "What's that? There's no such professional career path. Just be a doctor." So I was pushed into doing medicine.
How old were you when you had this conversation with your mom?
It was actually when I had started A-levels at the time. And my parents were sending me abroad. And I said, no, I want to stay here and be a social worker. And my mom said, no, you're going abroad to do your A-levels because then you can get into medicine. And I said, well, I don't really want to do medicine. And then she said, well, do it, sort of thing.
You don't have a choice.
You don't really have a choice. We didn't argue. I think in those days, you sort of listened to your parents and you towed the line. And my sister, who was 18 months ahead of me, had been very clear she wanted to become a doctor. So I just followed suit. But I knew entering medical school that when I came out, I was going to be working with kids in pediatrics.
Before even starting
Yeah.
your curriculum. Okay, wow.
Yeah. And I was lucky that I was in a medical school that really did teach us medicine in a different way. So we learned systems, but we also learned the process of how people conceive children, right? And we followed families up as they got older. And this whole, I remember there was a module called Human Development, Behavior, and Aging. And it was not so much the science of medicine, but also the social, psychological aspect of it. And that really intrigued me.
Can you elaborate on the distinction between the two? The science aspect and
Yeah.
also the psychological, behavioral aspect?
Yeah. So we often learned medicine in the first 2 years. We learned the science of it traditionally in traditional courses. So you learn anatomy, so that's the structure of the body. And then you learned the biochemistry of it, so right down to the cellular level, the mechanisms of how cells function. Then you learn things like microbiology, which was the infections that affect the body. And so most medical schools learned it in separate sections like that. Where we were in Newcastle, it was taught as a system. When you learned about the thoracic system, you learned about the heart, the lungs, but you learned the cellular aspects, the enzymes, etc., and even the drugs that were involved. And we were exposed to cases. And alongside that was this other aspect of learning about how humans functioned in society. So in our first year, we followed up a pregnant mother to the point that she delivered her baby.
Oh, wow.
So we would visit.
Like each student followed a...
Yeah, so we were paired up. Two of us would follow one family.
Oh, wow.
So the family that me and my partner followed up was interesting because this was her third child. One of her older children had a chronic medical problem. So she was juggling that. And quite often the families we followed up were from lower socioeconomic groups. So we learned the struggles they went through in terms of putting food on the table, how they managed raising other kids, etc., and how they managed their own health. And then in our second year, we followed up older person with chronic health problems, not mental health. We had an older lady who had very bad arthritis and early dementia. So seeing how she managed her life. So at the same time, in our clinical course, we were learning neurology, the science behind it, the medications that we use, etc. So it sort of pieced things together. We always, as we were growing up, saying, okay, doctors prescribe medication, but why is the patient not improving? Having been through that whole experience, you know that you can prescribe medications, but if that medication is making someone have side effects, they're not going to take it, right? You can say to a mother who's pregnant, make sure you eat well, etc. But if you are struggling with money, if you are having other children who have health issues, you don't have time to prioritize yourself. So I think that sort of experience in medical school it opened my eyes to it. So even when we were doing pediatrics, we had to follow a child with a chronic medical problem. So we were seeing children in hospital, but seeing them in their own home with a chronic medical problem gives you a different perspective. When they come to hospital, they're sick, they're vulnerable, parents are vulnerable, they get treated, they go home. Why is it they come back again very quickly? Because their medical condition isn't managed so well at home. Being at home, you realize what the other confounding factors are, and things like why a child who should be fit and well doesn't want to go to school. So the boy that we were following up, he had immune system affecting his gut. So as a result of all his medications, his growth was stunted. He didn't want to go to school, not because his gut issues were not sorted, but because he was teased in school about the way he looked, because he was shorter. Because of the steroids he took, he had a chubbier face, he was slower with movements, etc. So I think That's what also intrigued me about medicine.
So going back to that specific module, that
Human development, behavior, and aging.
gave you a glimpse of the differences between the scientific element and also the behavioral element. Pick up from where we left off.
Okay. Of course, along the way, I knew I wanted to be pediatrics. You go through the whole rigmarole of having to sit for your postgraduate exams, working as a junior doctor, doing the on-calls, etc. And during my training, in what we call the registrar training, specialist training, I became pregnant. I actually was very intrigued by the brain, and I wanted to be a pediatric neurologist. But as fate would have it, I became a mother. I had to make choices about my career path that took into account that I had a new life to look after. And being away from the extended family made it more challenging. So after discussing with my consultant mentors, they said, why not do training in neurodisability? And that's what it was called in the UK at the time, where, you're still dealing with children who have neurological problems, but not so much children who needed a lot of medication as treatment, but also looking at the other aspects of development, behavior, learning in children. Hence why I went down that path. In the UK, it was called neurodisability. In Malaysia, it's called Developmental Paediatrics.
There was a point at which you left the UK to come back
Yeah.
to Malaysia.
Yeah.
Give me the context around how you came back and how did you set up and pioneer the developmental pediatrics in this country.
So, my husband's in the medical field. He's a gastroenterologist, so very much more straightforward. When I first came back, he had got a job at University Malaya, and I actually wanted to get a job in University Malaya, but was told that there was no subspecialty in neurodisability at that point or development at that point. I also spoke to pediatricians in KKM, Kementerian Kesihatan Malaysia, was given the same feedback. And then I went to meet the head of Department of Paediatrics at UKM at that time, a man I'm very indebted to because he opened the doors for me coming back to Malaysia. Professor Dr. Zulkifli, he's very active in the field of pediatrics. And he said, yes, we want to set something up like this in UKM that is in our plan for the future. So submit your application and we'll see if you get hired as a lecturer. And I did join UKM. At first, there wasn't that subspecialty in Malaysia. Luckily, they had already earmarked one of the specialists, Dr. Juriza, who was going to be in charge of setting this up. So I worked very closely with Dr. Juriza, and then a couple of years later, Dr. Raja Jonita came back. And we initially started clinics. Myself and Dr. Juriza, we started clinics within the Department of Paediatrics to see children with developmental issues. And we had a lot of support from the department, particularly a professor of pediatric neurology, Professor Ong Lai Chu. I think in the process of this, we had to fill in gaps in the department because we hadn't set up something physical. So we were sort of put in to fill in gaps in other specialties. And there were times when it was hard. But having mentors like Professor Dr. Zulkifli, Prof. Ong Lai Chu, we had a clinical psychologist in our department, Professor Vijay Chandran. They were instrumental in helping us set it up. So the physical space was set up. We put out working papers to have a social worker in the department, a counselor in the department, and clinical psychologist in the department. And you have to understand, at that point, the recognition of allied health professionals was not there yet.
So allied in this context is those clinical psychologists,
yes,
counselors, etc.
Yeah.
Okay.
So UKM were very forward thinking in trying to set up something like this, which involved a multidisciplinary team. And we had very good support also from the speech therapists, the occupational therapists, and the physiotherapists. So that multidisciplinary work was already happening in UKM, in the neurology department and other departments within the pediatric department. It helped. We put all this together and we had a physical space, and we were all up and running actually. From 2004, we had started our clinics, but the physical space, the Child Development Center, was officiated, if I'm not If I remember rightly, it was 2007. So it was great. And I continued to work there. We pushed for it to be recognized as a subspecialty because UKM was the only hospital in Malaysia that recognized this specialty. And KKM took a while, but finally they too realized. You see, you have to understand that children were surviving as a result of the improvements in neonatal ICU care. So there were more and more premature babies or high-risk babies surviving with some developmental disabilities, having developmental learning behavioral issues that needed support. And of course, people started to realize that out there in the community, we were seeing a lot more children with neurodevelopmental disorders. So finally, in 2008, we were asked to draw up a training program that would be relevant to Malaysia to produce more developmental pediatricians. So the training program is 2 years in Malaysia, and it involves rotating through pediatric neurology, child psychiatry, as well as, if possible, genetics or other pediatric subspecialties to gain knowledge, and then a year spent abroad in established units which have multidisciplinary working as well. Now, KKM has quite a few. UPM, all have got child development centers.
Doctor, I can tell that you're clearly on a mission, right? I can tell from the passion, the energy that you're speaking with, that you're on a mission to make a real impact within this subspecialty within the nation. If you were to describe in a line or two, what is that mission that you're on?
I think medicine has changed from treating illnesses to helping people heal.
Okay, elaborate.
You may be able to treat a child with chronic asthma, but if you don't address other issues that may have impacted this child as a result of his asthma, then you are actually failing that child, right? That's one. You have to understand when we are dealing with children specifically who have neurodevelopmental disorders. I'm rambling, right? You told me 2 sentences, but I can't do this in 2 sentences.
Fine, yeah.
When we see children with autism or ADHD or Down syndrome, we are not curing them. Yes, we use medications where it is necessary, but more than that, we are there to support families in how and what they can do to help their children so that their children can then contribute or enjoy going to school, being children, and minimizing further disability that will affect their functioning in society.
That's interesting. Okay, maybe eventually, touch wood, it doesn't come as soon, but eventually you will retire.
Yes.
Right? So when you do retire and you were to look back upon the career that you've had, maybe within the last 10 years of your career, what would you have to have achieved for you to be like, I'm proud of everything that I've done. I didn't leave anything on the table.
It's very hard, to say that I've looked back and I've achieved everything that I want to achieve, because personally, I'm the sort of person who feels that I've never achieved 100%. But what I hope that I maybe have contributed to is younger people being interested in this field of developmental pediatrics so that there aren't so few of us, one. But more than that, I hope that all pediatricians are starting to look at children holistically and not look at just the illness that the child has.
Going back to what you're saying earlier, not just treating the illnesses, but focusing on healing them. No, I like that because it's multifactorial, right? I think it's like an onion, right? You peel the layers. There's a root cause.
Yeah, you have the right words, which I don't have.
No.
But I think, and the third thing which I think we have made a lot of strides in, is in the field of medicine, doctors cannot work on their own. They need collaborative work. And traditionally, doctors have always been put on that pedestal. The doctor knows best, traditionally. Nurses, allied health professionals always look to the doctor to make that final decision. I hope that in the last 10 years before this, what I have hopefully shown is that we can't work alone. We need the help of the allied health professionals to be able to support families and especially children in being the best that they can be, regardless of their different needs. And I think we've made strides with that within the field of developmental pediatrics because we constantly discuss with our speech therapy colleagues, our clinical psychologists. We don't see them as beneath us. We, in fact, sometimes need their expertise to be able to then impart the right message or right plan for the child in a way.
No, definitely very interesting insight. How long have you been working within a subspecialty for?
Gosh, I've been back in Malaysia for 23 years. Prior to that, I was in the UK and training in this field since 1997.
Okay.
Yeah.
So almost 30 years.
Yeah.
In these last 30 years,
Yeah.
doctor, in these last 3 decades, what have you noticed, maybe on a national level, or maybe even in a global level, if you have any interesting insights, what have you noticed in terms of the evolution of developmental disorders, in terms of the increasing number of cases, secondly, the complexity, thirdly, the way in which these cases are dealt, maybe like you said, ecosystems in place, let's call it that.
Yeah.
Allied health professionals, I assume when you first started out, it was just solely the doctors, maybe.
Yeah.
So talk me through the evolution over the last 3 decades.
I think here in Malaysia, we are a couple of steps behind when it comes to this area. But even in the UK, I would say when I was there, the area of disability, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary working was already happening. What changed in the UK before I came back was that the government started to put funding in to support children within schools. And what was really exciting in the UK was how we weren't just running clinics in the Child Development Centre in the hospital. We were all running clinics in the community and even in schools, actually.
Wow.
Yeah, which was great because then we had direct input and we didn't have to examine kids or assess kids within a room, a bit like this. But we were seeing them within the classroom ecosystem, when they were having lunch, etc. When we
So how
were
did that
running
work,
clinics.
doctor? Like, walk me through an example of how a school maybe would reach out to
Okay.
doctors like you. And
So in the UK, what used to happen was teachers would sometimes, or in nurseries, preschools, schools, would raise concerns about children who had developmental behavior or learning issues. And then that would then be referred to the community nurse who was in charge of children in that area. And then that nurse would go in to observe that child, have discussion with the teachers, and then trigger a referral to the doctor who was in charge of that particular area. Then we would go into this, of course, parents would be informed as well. We would go into the school, see the child or children, so children in that particular school or that particular area, either in the school, or if parents were not able to attend, then they would be seen outside school hours, within office hours, in a community clinic. So then we would get input from everyone, and then the kids would be based on the medical report, based on teachers' report, the education services would decide that this children needs this amount of support in the school. It would also sometimes involve medication. Remember, children with chronic medical problems. So we could advise on maybe timing of medication so it didn't interrupt school hours, etc. So there was that collaborative working. And that was exciting for me. And then
this was back in the 90s.
yeah, and then in the late 90s, they started to say, okay, children who are on the autism spectrum, and this is due to lobbying of parents, would have teaching assistant in the classroom to support them so they could remain in the mainstream. Because the UK was transitioning from special schools to inclusion. So they were actually shutting down special schools and they wanted kids who could manage in mainstream with support to be in mainstream with support. Because the research had shown that when children were included, it did not just benefit the children who had the different support needs, but it also benefits children who are deemed to be neurotypical to become more empathetic,
Oh,
and that had an impact long term, right? So
also,
in the sense that you didn't segregate society, you know,
yeah,
children were taught to
yeah, yeah.
be with
like
other
that.
children, help your friend.
Do we
You
have that
know?
here in Malaysia?
So increasingly, we have to have that here in Malaysia. Education blueprint before this was the first time that it was in the education blueprint, 2015 to 2025. In that education blueprint, it was actually stated that by 2025, children with special needs had to be included, 75% of children had to be included. So it was in the blueprint. On the ground, of course, with everything, it depended on the school, etc. Yeah. So inclusion was something that was great in the UK. When I came back to Malaysia, at that time, it was so hard to see that inclusion practices were really almost non-existent. It was almost, we had in our national schools, not all schools, some schools had the kelas integrasi, the integrated classes. And this was supposed to be inclusion. But actually, what was happening was the kids in the class integrasi were in sometimes even a separate building, or they were occupied the ground floor, and there may be a barrier to stop the kids running out, etc. They even had their recesses at different times. So they were in the school in name, but there was very
Still
little
barriers.
mixing. So there were a lot of barriers there. Over time, and I think what we've seen is that, yes, the number of cases have increased, that there were kids who could learn, but maybe had some social issues, etc. And they were in the classrooms. So they were being included to some extent, but teachers were not equipped with the skills to know how to manage their behaviors and their different styles of learning. So at the start, it was very challenging, I think. But if I look back when I first came to now, so much has changed. I like to be positive, but at the same time, there's a lot more work we need to do. I know a lot of people look at it very negatively. Oh, we haven't moved a lot. But really, let's think about it. We should give praise where praise is due. And if we don't, we discourage the people who are trying to make those little steps.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah. But there's still a lot more work to do. So we still have to push for more inclusion and support for children.
Doctor, for those who are listening who aren't familiar with the role of a developmental pediatrician, how do you define what a developmental pediatrician does?
So now I see the role of a developmental pediatrician as somebody, yes, we assess children in more depth for developmental, behavioral, and learning issues. We are trained in specific assessments that require us to pass certain training tests, sort of thing, to be able to assess in more depth. I see our role because I feel things like initial diagnosis of autism and ADHD in clear-cut cases should be done by a general pediatrician or a family medicine specialist. But in terms of the more challenging behaviors that some of these children are facing, or the use of medication in trying to help mitigate any severe behavioral issues, that's our role. I see the future now for development. I see my role and also the role of my colleagues is to pick up the more challenging cases that are not responding to therapy. Why are they not? Let's work through the problems, etc. Most of us still do a lot of initial assessments, at least most of us in private practice do a lot of initial assessments, but increasingly, because of our wait times, I think most of us are now seeing the children who are more challenging come through.
How do you define challenging?
So these are
Give
children.
me an example of a patient maybe you've seen recently.
Okay, give you an example of one of our patients that I reviewed last week. So he was diagnosed at 2 years old. So it was picked up by KK, Clinic Kesehatan. And then his aunt, who is an allied health professional, suggested to mom to come and see me. He is on the severe end of the spectrum. He also had, when I first saw him, not just his lack of social interaction, lack of communication was a problem. He was also very clumsy. He had what we call comorbid dyspraxia. He was falling over a lot. Coordination was probably more of a concern to me because of his awareness of what was in front of him, etc. Anyway, he went through the whole process. He's what we call a young man with severe autism spectrum disorder. Level 3, he goes to a special school now. He is now 16 plus. So I have been seeing him since he was 2 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
Wow.
he, at some points, I would only see him once a year just as a check-in. But ever since he was 13, and it tied in with when we saw some pubertal changes, like his voice started to break. We started to get other challenges. For example, he started to what everybody thought was vomit food, okay, at 13. But actually what he was doing was forcing himself to regurgitate his food. And then it caused weight loss. And then he started to not be able to sleep at night. He would shout a lot, disturb the family. And leading up to that, he was actually a very placid boy, obedient per se, very easy to look after. So this was disrupting the sleep of his older brother, who was a secondary school student studying. It was disrupting the sleep of his parents, who needed to go to work. And he was starting to become very aggressive towards Kara, who happened to be his grandaunt. And he was also starting to wake up in the middle of the night to eat. You remember he's regurgitating his food. And we saw a drastic reduction in his weight as well.
Wow.
To be fair, he was overweight before, because one of the ways they used to calm him down was with food. Every time he would cry, etc., give him food, he calms down. But now he's becoming a teenager. So we needed to step in with medication. Initially, we thought maybe he's got reflux that's making him upset, in pain. That was treated by a GP. But then I realized that he wasn't actually vomiting. He was regurgitating food. So that's the benefit of digital devices. Now parents can take videos to share what they mean. Number 2, we needed to manage his sleep for the sake of the rest of the family, not just him. So then we needed to use medication to manage that. And we needed to also introduce behavioral therapy. So parents were advised to seek private behavioral therapy sessions as well.
Like CBT?
So it's actually called ABA.
Okay.
Yeah, CBT works for people because it's cognitive behavior therapy. Changing behavior through cognitive means requires you to be able to communicate, and requires you to be able to understand what the psychologist is working on to be able to change your behavior. With ABA,
What does ABA stand for?
okay, applied behavior analysis.
Okay.
So they look at the behavior, what's triggering the behavior. So there's a lot of charting of behavior, and then they try strategies to manage that behavior and reward the child as they go along, short-term rewards, to see if that can help change the behavior, and then slowly withdraw the rewards. Okay, so in this boy's case, food was a good reward to motivate him to do certain things. So the ABA therapist introduced a lot of activities of daily living, getting him to dress himself, do simple things himself. So he didn't have to depend on people coming in to do things for him, but at the same time nagging him. We have managed to come to a level where we have reduced some of his medication use, but also we now have other challenges because he is 17 and he is going to need to be more self-sufficient.
Sounds very complex.
Yes.
Doctor, so ASD, right? Autism spectrum disorder. Earlier you mentioned with this particular patient, he was level 3.
Yes.
Right. So how wide is the spectrum actually? And let's go from left to right. Like in a milder case, what would that sort of patient look like? And from a very complex case, I know it's very nuanced. Like there's no like, oh, level 3, it's just this type, right? It can be very different, but
very different. And every child's challenge is going to be different. At different stages, it's going to be different. So with this boy, like I said to you, no major issues when he was younger. We addressed some of his dyspraxia, etc. He went to dyspraxia, his motor coordination difficulties, with an occupational occupational therapist worked with him so that he wouldn't be injured so much. Of course, that has limited his ability to do some functional skills, but I think that's also because his grandaunt was doing everything for him. And they also had a helper later on to support grandaunt. So primary school years, no major issues, but then come 13, that's when we started to see challenges. So as a level 3, although his autism was on the severe end because he needed a lot of support to take instruction, to understand instructions, to be able to engage with other people, etc. That's why he was labeled level 3. Now, you ask, yes, you're right, very wide spectrum.
What are the levels, doctor?
So level 1, this child needs minimal support. There's two parts to the diagnosis of autism: the social communication abilities
And the behavioral.
and then the behavioral abilities. So you could be level 1 for your behavior, but you could be level 3 for your social communication. Then we know we need to work a lot on the social communication. And it's fluid, so it can change because some children with intervention, it improves. So a child who's on level 1 can be in a mainstream setting, can go out there, go to school, can integrate. They may be a little bit socially awkward. They may misunderstand language, jokes, humor, but they just need that little bit more support to understand these things. And they may need help. Say, for example, they have to write a karangan. You know, somebody says, write a karangan about saya sebatang pencil. They would say, I'm not a pencil. It's ridiculous why you're asking me to do
Take
this.
it literally.
Yeah, you know, so it could be those sort of challenges that they have. So most of them can still be in a mainstream setting with maybe some social issues that need support, maybe, or a little bit with their language, etc. There are many professionals who may be level 1 autism. Okay. And I know some who've gone out to work now, some who've actually got their kids now. It means that they can integrate
Still
and
function,
function in society. Level 2 means they need some support
Okay.
in the classroom. So these may be students who need more support in a classroom setting. Maybe they need to have someone always telling them what that person is trying to tell you. Now, it doesn't always mean a therapist, okay? It could even be friends always saying, no, don't get angry. He means this when he says this. But that has to be constantly there. I'm giving you very brief examples here. Some level 2 people with level 2 autism spectrum disorder can be in mainstream if their learning abilities or their behavioral or social communication issues are not interfering functionally.
Okay.
Yeah. Level 3 usually means you need a lot of support. So these are the children who cannot probably be in a mainstream setting, who need a lot of support, probably in a special education setting.
So it just goes from level 1 to level 3.
Level 1 to
within
level
those
3
categories.
is to let us help parents understand that this is the support they need.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it can change, like I keep saying to you.
Fluid. Yeah.
In the old days, we had diagnosed autism differently. There were people who had Asperger. There were people who had autism. So it's not called autism spectrum, it was called autism. Then there were people who had pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. So these were children or adults who had more social communication difficulties, but not so much behavioral difficulties. But people realized that it was very difficult. Abilities vary a lot, hence why they decided umbrella autism spectrum disorder. And in some countries in those days, if you had Asperger or PDD NOS, you did not get support from the government, only if you had a diagnosis of autism. But they felt that some people with Asperger or PDD NOS maybe needed some support and funding for their support. So let's just put it under a bigger umbrella.
Doctor, so as a developmental pediatrician, earlier you mentioned that you don't just treat patients with, it's a range, right, of different patients. Even within autism, you have level 1, level 2, level 3.
Yeah.
But you also patients who have ADHD,
Yes.
patients with comorbidity.
Yeah.
What others?
I see children who have chronic medical problems who end up having developmental problems.
Such as
So right now, just last week, I saw a 3.5-year-old who's had chronic severe eczema since he was 3 months old. We're talking about very bad eczema to the point that he's been admitted to hospital for dressings, for treatment, etc. And how has that eczema resulted in developmental problems? Because of his severe eczema, it has affected his sleep, made feeding him also a little bit challenging. Also because the parents always felt, oh, is it food that was triggering his eczema as he got older? Because his eczema worsened after he turned 1. He didn't go out much because they were always scared of triggers, or if I'm in a cold mall, that can trigger it. If I'm on the hot sun, that can trigger it, etc. So he was very much cocooned and sheltered at home. Spent some time in hospital, in and out. And so now he's got delays in his development, in his motor skills. He talks, but he's a very anxious boy, and he has what we call sensory processing difficulties. He does not like touching and eating things that are soft, kueh, playing with Play-Doh, sand, and that has, as a result, means he doesn't really handle a lot of things. So he may handle hard toys, but if there's a part of the toy which may be a little bit soft, he will just cast that toy away. So now that's affected his development in so many ways. You imagine if you've been sort of not allowed to crawl about because that, or you don't crawl because it's painful, because you've got eczematous patches on your knees. He can walk, but because he didn't go through that crawling stage, that also affects him and affects his sensory processing. So yeah, that's one child that I'm dealing now. So although his eczema is better now, he's older and he's on treatment. I think it's an immunotherapy or something that he's on now that is helping him, but it still impacted his development per se.
In terms of a percentage, doctor, so across those ADHD, comorbidity, autism, patients with medical conditions would then evolve into some form of developmental disorder, what are the percentage from your caseload?
Right now, majority of my patients, about 60%, fall in the autism spectrum disorder. I have got a couple of children with other medical issues who also have autism. Also see many or increasingly children being referred to me with ADHD. If they don't have ADHD, attention issues which impact their learning as well. Yeah, but it doesn't impact their daily functioning in other areas as well. So you could say these are children with specific learning disorders, etc. I also have quite a number of infants who are born, I would say not quite a number, maybe about 5% high-risk babies. So these are babies who are graduates of the neonatal intensive care units. So they were born either prematurely or because of a maternal illness, they were delivered prematurely, or they suffered some sort of injury at birth, brain injury at birth for a variety of reasons. So increasingly we are seeing more mothers who have diabetes, older mothers with hypertension in pregnancy, and that has an impact on babies as well. Yeah, so I would say that's currently about 5 to 10% of my caseload as well, high-risk babies. Yeah.
Are there any causal factors that give rise to these developmental disorders?
Genetics play a role because genetics determines a lot of things. You inherit your genes from your parents. And it's quite interesting because if you read about Barker's hypothesis, you know that if a baby is born with growth retardation, that baby is going to be at higher risk of hypertension, diabetes, etc. as an adult, right? However, if you intervene, you can prevent some of this from happening. So there's this thing that you don't just give birth to your next generation, you're actually going to give birth to subsequent generations. So if you have those genes, so genes can be altered by environment as well, right? And diabetes is a clear example of that. If you know you are at risk of diabetes, you can remain in that pre-diabetic or non-diabetic range if you make the right choices in terms of your lifestyle, right? In neurodevelopmental disorder, genes play a part, but we know the environment is also very important. We also know that stress is also very important. So you're thinking, how does stress affect the baby, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's my follow-up question.
So it starts from actually preconception. So a mother, before a person has a baby, if they have the right nutrition, they have the right environment that they live in. When we say environment, free from environmental toxin, in places that have good facilities to support their health, their education, their well-being, a job, enough money, that has an impact on your stress levels as well, right? Then that person conceives. Now, if that person is in good health, does not develop any medical issues such as diabetes, hypertension, etc., and has no other stressors, then we see that that subsequently leads to an infant who then thrives in the environment that they live in. If you start off bad nutrition, poor social economic status, exposed to drugs, alcohol, smoking, that already makes your baby that you're going to deliver at risk. And then in pregnancy, you are stressed, that is already going to have an impact on your baby's brain development and stress hormone. If you constantly expose babies in utero to stress hormones like cortisol, we see that those babies later grow up to have anxiety issues, problems with their executive functioning, etc., etc. And this is shown even in Asian society. So there's a good study called the Gusto study in Singapore that followed up women and then their children,
GUSTO.
GUSTO. And what it showed is the mothers did not have to be diagnosed with anxiety disorder or depressive disorder. They gave them checklists. If they had anxiety symptoms, even though they didn't have the disorder, or depressive symptoms, they didn't have the disorder, their babies had these issues later on.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's the same with just generally the neurodevelopmental disorders. You can reverse some of this. So if you think about the life course development of a human, your life course is influenced by where you're born, which country you're born, which town you're born, which state you're born. Even if in Malaysia, somebody who's born in Bangsa may well do better than somebody who, say, previously was born in the Pekliling flats. You remember the Pekliling flats that they brought down? Yeah. We know that there were a lot of drug addicts, etc. there, right? So what we're saying is environment is important because environment can alter your genes. That's the theory of epigenetics. And it holds true even in developmental disorders. We also know nurturing care. Nurturing care is when parents and babies, infants, have this back and forth exchanges, a lot of interaction with your baby is very important in trying to minimize stress as well as time goes on.
What do you think parents who have kids who may be struggling with some form of developmental disorders want to hear from you?
They want to hear, do you have a quick fix?
What would they benefit from? What would they benefit from?
I think they need to hear that there are no quick fixes and that you are the biggest impact on your child and how you nurture them. Right now, you hear so many people talking about stem cells, this supplement, that supplement. One parent told me this. I mean, I've known her for years. She spent over $1 million on complementary treatments, most of which did not
That's crazy.
help her son.
Well, based in Malaysia?
Yeah.
Million ringgit.
Yeah.
Wow.
Owen is now 19. She says close to $1 million ringgit because we convert. Just doing sheep stem cells. Per stem cell is 35,000. She did 6 rounds of stem cell. Now that's already what?
210.
Yeah. Right? She went to Singapore to do hyperbaric oxygen treatment and buy supplements from this particular doctor for over 6 years. I mean, I kept telling her, I don't think this is working. And she paid for a machine that did neurofeedback, right? And she paid something like 200,000 to have that machine sent to her from Korea so she could do neurofeedback at home all the time. So over his course, his life, she spent close to $1 million. But all that was done along the way until he hit 14. Pandemic hit. She couldn't do a lot of things anymore. And she said that was when she had to reevaluate what she had to plan for him in the future because she was so focused on cure. That then she realized, oh my God, he's not going to be cured. I now have to think, what do I do? Last of all, he was kicked out of his learning center. So during the pandemic, the learning center disbanded. So one of the teachers who gelled with Owen started to tutor him initially online. Then she sent him to her house and then she thought about it. Kudos to her. He has got his driving license now.
Oh, wow.
He's always been obsessed about cars. So what do I want to tell parents? That a lot of it is you. There are no quick fixes, and don't do therapies just for cure. Think about skills that they can learn for future.
I was watching a couple of YouTube videos the night before, doctor, just to get. I don't think I've ever encountered someone who had on the spectrum, but yeah, just watching a couple of videos just to get a feel of it and actually see what are actually the struggles of someone who struggles with it, but also the people around them. As you mentioned earlier, that patient you've been seeing for 14 years, with someone who struggles with something intensely. I guess not even like a developmental disorder, even physical conditions, right? Or mental disorders. It affects everyone around you, everyone who cares for you, everyone who loves you, right? So I think I watched this video, and it was this 40-year-old man who still lives with his parents, and you could tell they had a lot of care for him. One thing, parents who have kids on the spectrum, I think that they are conditioned to become his patient.
Yeah.
Right? You have to be. But one thing they said that made me tear up honestly was the only thing they're afraid of, like you said, you can equip them with all the tools so that they can for sustenance and stuff like that. But at the same time, it's like eventually the parents will go, and when they go, who's going to take care? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? And yeah, I think it's quite a sad thing, honestly. I'll just read out a couple of things that the dad said that really made me feel really emotional. One was like, oh, he doesn't complain. He never complains. That's the beauty about my boy. The other thing was, once you get to know him, you will know that he's very affectionate. At my old age, it's a joy to have a son like him. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that? What happens after the primary caretaker is gone?
So I would say to parents, prioritize living skills at home, and start with the self in the home, and then get them used to being in the community. You have to think long term and build your own community, because some children are going to continue to need support. Gone are the days you can rely on family, right?
Yeah.
But if you build a community,
Wait, why do you say that? Gone are the days you can rely on family.
I see it in my own family. I have a cousin. Growing up, we were told that she is mentally retarded because the maid dropped her when she was a baby. But being a medical doctor, I can see she has a small head, she looks different, and I know now
Oh, you
she's
have
got a
context.
genetic disorder,
Right.
right? She is now going to be 60.
Yeah.
My aunt is 89 now. Her two sisters are in Australia,
So she's
married with their own families. What is going to happen to her after my aunt goes? Right? And the problem is she was always confined at home. My aunt didn't really take her out much, even to immediate family functions.
Did she go to
So
school? Was she educated?
after 10 years old, they stopped sending her to
Oh, no.
special school. So she was going to Spastic Center in PJ. Spastic Center in PJ took in all the kids with disabilities, whether it was physical, mental, etc. She didn't have physical disabilities. Hers was more learning and etc. So she's always been looked after. There's always been a maid that helps my aunt. My aunt's not gone for a lot of things. She didn't go for her first grandchild being born, could not go for her own daughter's wedding reception in Australia. I mean, they came here and got married, but she couldn't go for that one. When her own brothers and sisters passed on, she couldn't go for their funerals. Her husband would, and her husband was very supportive, but he suddenly died of a heart attack in 2019, just before COVID. I'm pretty sure the will to live is still there because she's worried about what's going to happen to my cousin.
Yeah.
I
remember once, Bala's banana leaf?
Yes.
Once I went out for breakfast early in the morning at like 7 a.m. on a Friday before work. I think it was full. So this old Punjabi uncle sat with me because there were no other tables. And then we started chatting, and then he basically was telling me that he had a son who was on the spectrum as well. And he's probably like touching 80s, right? So I assume his son maybe around 50s or something. And I think one of the biggest struggles is the acceptance, right? Accepting that your child is struggling with this, right? I can't imagine how you convey to parents as well that their child might be on the spectrum. But yeah, then you find different ways to cope with it. I guess, like you said, community, finding maybe education and awareness that helps as well. Schools that are specialized in this. He said one thing that's gotten him through this journey was someone once told him that God gives special kids to special parents. right? So it was in a way that he was chosen to take care of this. Like many people wouldn't be able to endure the care that needs to be taken. So even with your aunt, she's special in a way because it's not easy, right? Now she's basically taking care of her by herself, I assume, because she's her husband. This one, yeah.
So, previously, I would say that he's special, you're special, and you just got to look at the positives and let's see, okay, what of the negatives is impacting him most, and let's try and work on it. I don't say that in so many words. I say it as depending on I try and assess the spirituality level of family. So, we are taught to ask about social history, like where they live, etc., what their jobs are, etc. And I always ask them, are you religious? Do you go anywhere?
Okay.
Because support for parents is very important. Having faith is very important.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have faith and you give up, I always believe if you believe in a God, you can pray at least at the start. God's going to help those who help themselves, people say. But without faith, it's very hard, I find, for some people. I mean, and it's been shown that children who have spirituality, they don't have to have a religion, but they are exposed to spirituality, are more resilient than children who are not exposed to spirituality. So it's not about religion or whether your mother sends you to a religious class or things like that, but your mother helps you believe in that higher
being, higher power.
higher power, etc. Like the Atman is within you. You just got to discover it, and that sort of thing. It's hard. So one parent one day before, I used to sometimes say, not on the first visit, but sometimes I'll say, yeah, they say special children are born to special parents. And one day one parent said to me, I can't stand all these people. It's actually the current generation coming through. All these people who tell me, I'm special because God chose me and gave me a special child. I don't think so. I think God cursed me. And, they fight back against this. So I don't say that, but I say to them that, we're all given challenges in life in a different way. It's how we try to work through some of these challenges. And in your case, your challenge is not how I cure my son, but how do I connect with my son so then it's easier for me to teach him how to be self-sufficient. So I tell them that in a more practical sense. You have to be very careful with younger parents now.
Doctor, having seen patients like this for the last 20, 30 years,
Yeah.
I can imagine at the initial stages, seeing patients at level 1, level 2, level 3, you have different ones. And I know some of them can get aggressive as well. So I can't imagine at the initial stages, even for you, it might have been overwhelming. But how do you think seeing these patients and dealing with these parents has changed the way you view life?
I think because I did a lot of reading and learning, I realized that even amongst building resilience in children and all that the role of the parents is so, so important. And the support system around as well.
That's your nature versus nurture. That's your nurture. That's your environment, right?
Yes. How important environment
And
is.
that's something you can
And
control.
yes. And it helped me with my parenting of my kids.
How so?
Open communication with my children.
What does that mean to you, open communication?
Most parents, how do you put it? How did it change me? Yeah, so I never used to reward them for their marks. So, after exams, I didn't wait for results to come out for us to celebrate. I always said to them, it's hard work that's going to be more important in the long term than the results. So there's this one time where, so my youngest is very bright. She doesn't really have to work hard, but sometimes she thinks she's smart lah. So I still remember my second one, they were both studying. 5-year gap between them. So she was standard 1, she was standard 6. And of course, UPSR, right? So my second girl would work really hard. And my second one, of course, my youngest one's just standard 1. And she used to play the fool, etc. So the treat was, okay, Friday night, everybody's exam finished. You, Manisha, you get to choose the movie. So youngest one was very angry. Why? Why did you choose her? So I said, because Akaman worked really hard and did, whatever mommy said, come do this workbook and I'll help mark it and all that. She did it. You didn't. Then she said, yeah, but she's not going to get
Great.
the grades lah. I said, you can't compare standard 6 and standard 1. And I said, anyway, if you keep working like how you do now, you know where you're going to be, you know where you're going to get the
Wow,
sort
who
of
said
grades
that?
or whatever lah. So, it's that sort of motivation
Oh, I
lah.
love that.
So we always, and I never, like some parents will promise kids, I will buy you this if you get this grades, right? My parents used to do that as well. Like, I'll give you
I think
100
I
ringgit.
was.
Yeah.
I think I was like that. My dad.
I refused to do this. So my husband did it once with my eldest daughter. And she was, so by that time she had swapped to IGCSE. She desperately wanted an iPhone for the first time. I think he said to her something like, her English wasn't very good. She always got B's for her English. So he said, if you get all A's in all your subjects, I will get you an iPhone. And she said, really? Promise? So,
Shook on it, signed a contract.
okay. I said, you're asking for trouble. I said, you shouldn't do that because then you set a precedence,
Yeah.
with the
Yeah.
others. And of course, she did it, right? I mean, we were shocked because her English is always B. And her teacher is always complaining she doesn't read
That's
enough.
the power of incentives, doctor.
Yeah.
Incentives, it drives human nature. Like
I know, but to be fair to my eldest daughter, she was the sort of child that I never had to ask her to, like if I say to her, Ronnie, go and do this workbook, just do the first 2 chapters, she will never cheat and look at the answers. The answer will be at the back. And when I was pregnant with my youngest, she was standard 3, she would do the workbook herself without me asking. So she's always been driven. So in a way, I didn't have to. And it was just her teenage phase of, I want to get these shoes. But I would always say, no, you work for something, you help your sisters do da 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 da. I will give you some extra money, like you tutor them, sort of thing, lah.
So rewarding based on effort, not outcomes.
Yes.
I think that's key.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, doctor, I'll share a bit of my own experience. I
Yeah.
think my dad was very outcome-based rewarding, right? Got my first iPhone 4S if I get 5 A's for UPSR.
Okay.
Right, yeah, and then it carried on, right? Yeah, the upside is that, okay, I'm very driven by the incentives,
Yeah.
right? It's easy
Yeah.
to get me driven, but what then happens when I don't achieve that goal?
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
I've done a lot of reflection on this, right? For therapy as well. And it comes to a point where I attach my value to the outcomes I've achieved,
Yeah.
not the effort I've put in.
Yeah.
Right? So if I don't get, let's say, straight A's,
Yeah.
suddenly I feel I'm not good enough, I'm not
Yeah.
worthy of love, I'm not capable. And then I could go down a downward spiral. So
Exactly.
I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
Couple more questions, doctor. I think we digressed a bit, but
Yeah.
in terms of the open communication, how can parents foster more open communication with their children?
So don't always question your children. If you want to encourage them to talk, you have to talk and you have to listen. So you don't just come home and say, what did you learn in school today? Or what did you do today? You come home and you say, hi, good day, bad day. And then you talk about your day and then get them to talk about their day.
Right. Back and forth.
Yeah. And don't always tell them good things. Tell them the bad things that happened to you as well.
Do you do that?
Yeah.
Actually, okay. No, that's a good point.
Yeah. So my children have always heard, like today a parent yelled at me, a patient passed away and I was very upset. Patient was racist towards me and asked me, why no Chinese doctors doing... Yeah. One patient actually asked me straight to my face. So they know all these things because I don't want them to just tell me the good things. Right?
I think it's a very Asian mentality where you keep your problems to yourself.
Yeah. Sadly, that means that even now, they're miles away. Mommy, you're free to talk. I can talk to you right now. And it can be like, 6 o'clock in the evening, and I'm like, I'm so tired.
That's good, right?
Yeah,
rather than them going there and then you're speaking to them once a month.
True. I mean, like now, the other day, my daughter was feeling stressed, I think, but my husband and I were watching this Netflix series that we were, we had half an hour left and we're reaching the point, and then the phone rang and it was like on my phone, not his. So I said, oh my God, Mansha's calling. What should I do? So I answered the phone. She goes, I need to talk to you. I've had a bad day today. And then I said, okay, Mansha, I'm just finishing a webinar. I'll call you back, okay?
Does she know the truth now?
So when I called her back after that, I said, Mansha, I'm really sorry. I had to lie to you. And now I know how it feels because when she was younger, She wanted to go for Kumon class because her sister went for Kumon class, but then she never did the worksheet. She hid it under my sofa.
Oh my God, I've heard the stories before.
So then I reprimanded her and I said, if you don't want to go, you don't want to do it, you tell me. You don't hide things from me. I said, it's worse. I feel really sad, not because you didn't finish your homework, but because you lied to me.
Yeah.
Anyway, I said, confessed to her and I said, I'm sorry, Manisha, I lied to you. I actually wanted to watch this and I lied to you that I was on a webinar. She goes, Mom. I said, then she said, now you know how I felt when that come on. I said, yeah, I'm so sorry.
Full circle.
So she said, next time, Mommy, just tell me you got 20 minutes more of your Netflix and I'll wait. I said, okay. Yeah.
So I've listened to a couple of podcasts you've done, and one is I know you're passionate about screen time,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So you said the new batch of patients that are coming in, their parents are probably millennials,
Yes.
right? So I'm Gen Z. What are the things we should be conscious about and cautious in terms of lifestyle, and when we are to have kids one day, to prevent or minimize the chances of us having a kid who's got some struggling with not even like developmental disorders, is depression and anxiety considered?
Yeah. And we're seeing a lot more anxious kids now. They may not have a formal disorder, but they're anxious. And if we look back, it's to do with parents being anxious or parents being stressed during their pregnancy. Mothers being stressed during their pregnancy, etc. So I would always say, make sure you are healthy, not just from a physical sense, but your mental health is being looked after.
What should someone do to look after their mental health?
If you need to talk to somebody, a professional about it, don't be shameful. Go and talk to a professional. If it means it helps you work out your anxieties or your mood or something like that. Everybody goes through struggles, and if you think you need help, get help. Number two, when your baby is young, start to build that communication. Remember that back and forth communication that you have with babies from a young age sets the tone for later communication as well. Number three, don't just limit your circle to your nucleus family, father, mother, child. Get out there, build communities, take your kids out, let them experience falling down. I always say, if a child doesn't fall down and hurt himself, he won't know how to balance his body next time to be able to prevent falling. So children need experiences to.
That's a pretty that could be extended to just life
Yeah.
general life challenges, right?
Exactly.
If you never experience failure,
Yes.
one day when life hits you,
Yes.
yeah,
And expose your children to failure by showing them that you fail, but use that failure as a way of
get better.
Getting better.
That's interesting, Doctor, that you brought that up. I remember once I was listening to this podcast, and this pair of parents, they have fostered this tradition where every day at the family dinner table, rather than asking how's your day, they would go around the table asking what's one thing you failed at today.
Yeah, good.
How amazing is that?
Yeah.
Right? Because now you actively seek for things you feel, and then you reflect on them rather than trying to avoid it or trying to brush it under the rug. And then if you don't have something to say, you feel kind of left out. I think it's an amazing way to learn how to deal with it eventually and not be, I guess, like you say, shameful.
Yes.
This might be like a stretch, but do you think there's a correlation between screen time developing developmental disorders, or let's say even parents, okay, if they were to, because there isn't probably a large sample size to be able to make an analysis. So this about parents who were born in the era of social media and heavy screen time. If they were to have kids, are there a higher likelihood?
So I was always, no screen time. The recommendation is no screen time under 18 months. And if you look at different countries, some of them have previously said, oh, you can have screen time, but it's the quality of screen time, etc. One or two of these countries have gone back to say no screen time under 18 months old. And because we know that, it can be difficult to control what screen time you expose your child to. So if you say no, it's better than say, oh, quality. Everybody's quality is going to be different, right? But I realized that with the younger generation, you can't say no screen time. So I give them very clear examples, like if daddy is away for a weekend trip, or grandma's living in a different state, we want them to engage. They get to listen to grandma's voice, or they get to see grandma as well. If your child loves songs, you don't need to watch a video. You Bluetooth it to a speaker or hide your phone so it's just audio, and you sing with your child and you dance and do the actions.
Always a way around it.
So there's always a way around it. Yeah. And don't use screen time to soothe a child, to distract a child, or to babysit a child as well. So in this clinic, we usually do not turn on videos for children, right? We use bubbles. You see a lot of toys here. We bring them up and we do it.
Play therapy, right?
In a way, it's not quite play therapy.
Okay.
I used to say it's just play. We have, may not be able to see, but we have butterflies hanging from the walls, from the ceiling. So I get them to count the butterflies, or, we point to the butterflies. So we try and use, and parents say, and bubbles work a treat. Kids love bubbles, adults love bubbles. And we end that horrible jab with a pleasurable experience. So kids are not scared, right? So some people say, well, in the old days, the pediatrician will give you a sweet at the end of it, or a vitamin or something like that. But we believe that you can use other distractions.
Love that. All right, doctor. We have a closing tradition in this podcast where the last guest leaves a question for the next guest, not knowing who they'll be leaving it for. So the question is, and I think it ties in quite nicely with something you mentioned earlier on in this podcast, this conversation, which is when I asked you, looking back in the last 10 years of your career, what would you have had to achieve for you to be feel fulfilled? And you mentioned that you've always had this thing. I think the highest achievers across any fields typically have this feeling of not feeling enough. You're never hitting your potential. You're constantly pursuing the next goal, right? So the question is actually, when do you call it? When do you know enough's enough? It's a funny coincidence, but
that's a hard one. So the last person asked this question. I never know when it's enough. I always, sometimes, and this is something my husband says, I always talk about my day and things like that. And even when I don't talk about it, when I reflect on my day, at the end of a clinic, there will always be one, this feeling of, I should have done it differently or said something else.
even until today.
Even until today.
Oh, wow.
But I think because a lot of my patients have grown up, what I think I'm learning now, when is enough is when I get a random email from a parent saying, I was just thinking of you today. He's now doing this. Thank you so much. And you don't know how much you've helped me get this far. And these are kids who have not been able to go through mainstream, or these are kids who may be level 3 and level 2. That gives me some reassurance that, okay, I think I did enough for this family, for them to be so proud of these little moments of what their kids have achieved. So the case of the boy I told you who got his driving license, and the mom sent me the copy of the driving license because he wanted me to have a copy of it. I think that was something huge for me that made me think, okay, I think it was enough for this family because they are celebrating this now. And it's something that they never thought he would be able to achieve. Yeah.
Like that, yeah. I think oftentimes we set a goal, we achieve it, rather than savoring that triumph for a while. We then immediately look onto the next goal, right? Not giving us enough time to embrace and relish in the achievement. I guess your role in itself is very subjective because like compared to maybe like a surgeon, where it's either surgery goes well or not.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Whereas for you, like you say, you've had a patient that's been with you for 14 years.
Yeah.
Where it's a lifelong thing and the outcomes are very subjective. It's not binary. It's not yes or no.
Yeah.
Right? So it's easier to beat yourself up and be like, am I doing enough?
Yeah.
No, thanks for sharing that. But yeah, doctor, really enjoyed sitting across you and having this conversation for the past hour plus. For parents, anyone else who's listening, can they find out more about you and the work that you do?
Well, I'm older, I'm retiring. There are many more developmental pediatricians out there. I think as parents, don't need to look for me, but what they need to do is empower themselves to be able to help their children. Because No matter whether your child has a developmental disorder, whether your child has got asthma, whether your child has any illness, you want to get the right knowledge to empower yourself to be able to help your child. Yeah. The right knowledge, not hocus pocus. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Doctor. It's been
Okay.
an amazing conversation. Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Okay.